Welcome to Investors Reality. In today's video I want to talk about natural gas and the global financial implications of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and on the global economy. Natural gas has been one of the biggest issues since Russia's invasion because Europe has been dependent on gas that's been supplied directly by pipelines for the last 15 to 20 years. And as the war started to progress and we saw a reduction in the flows of gas coming directly from Russia, it started to cause a massive increase in prices. High prices mean high energy costs, mean high electricity costs, and that's been feeding into all of the inflation that we've seen in Europe and the rest of the world. Today I also want to talk to you about the recent falls that we've seen in gas prices over the last couple of months. Prices have actually been coming down, so we'll have a look at why that's been happening. We'll have a look what's going on with regards to the storage levels in Europe. But before we get started, I do want to welcome you to Investors Reality. This is where I try to analyze some of the current geopolitical events and what impact it could have for the global financial markets. Natural gas is a really important component for both Russia's economy, Europe's economy, and the global economy. Russia is the country that has the largest reserves of natural gas in the world. And although it ranks behind the USA in terms of the amount of natural gas produced, the United States is by far the largest consumer of natural gas in the world. And as a result of this, Russia is the world's largest exporter of this energy form. Now, the production and development of the natural gas reserves in Russia took off after the breakup of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. And this was done in conjunction with a number of overseas multinational companies such as Shell and BP. At that time, there was a global push to reduce the amounts of CO2 emissions. And as gas produces only around 50% of the carbon dioxide that coal emits upon burning, it was seen as a cleaner and more efficient energy. And therefore, a lot of countries all around Europe decided to construct power plants using natural gas as their main energy source. And this came at the same time that Russia was developing its gas industry. And so Russia constructed a number of major pipelines that delivered all of this gas directly to all of the power plants across Europe. So this arrangement worked perfectly for both Russia and its development partners in terms of developing all of that gas and all of the countries that wanted to move away from the dirty coal-powered electricity plants. So in 2021, Russia exported around 200 billion cubic meters of natural gas in a gaseous form. This was through the pipelines, compared to only around 39 billion cubic meters of liquefied natural gas. So at the same time that Europe built up its dependency on Russian gas supplies, Russia also built up a dependency on the revenue from all of those gas pipelines. Prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, a larger number of European countries had a massive dependency on those Russian gas imports. So that was a major problem for a lot of European countries at the start of this war, because they declared that they no longer wanted to buy any gas from Russia. But it is really difficult to replace large volumes of natural gas. Now, the situation was also a major problem for Russia, because in 2021, Russia earned around 43 billion of revenue from all of these gas sales, which equated to almost 10% of its total export revenues in 2021. And those revenues were earned at an average price of around $20 per megawatt hour. The immediate reaction to the invasion of Ukraine from all of the European countries was that they declared that they no longer wanted to buy any energy products from Russia. But that is easier said than done, particularly when it comes to natural gas, because gas is difficult to transport over long distances. So if you don't have a pipeline in place, the only way to transport it is to liquefy the gas, store it under pressure, and then put it onto ships. But switching your supply chain to liquefied natural gas is not a simple process, because firstly, you need to have the facilities to be able to reclassify it. So take the liquid, turn it back into gas, and then feed it into your gas network. Now, the easiest and quickest way to set up regasification facilities are to use floating facilities. So essentially, you have a large tanker which can receive all of the LNG, and then it can convert it, and you send the pipeline from that tanker into all of your network. Now, it's only feasible to be able to do that if you are a country that has a significant amount of coastline. But even if you have sufficient amount of coastline, you then need to make sure that you've got enough ports for these tankers to be able to come and dock, that they are deep enough, and that you have enough capacity, because most countries that have existing ports are already using them for other purposes. So you can't just stop all of your existing imports and exports to replace it with liquefied natural gas. Otherwise, it will have major impact on the economy. So hopefully by now you can start getting a feel as to how difficult it is to be able to set up these facilities. Because firstly, you need to have the physical geography in order to be able to set it up. Secondly, you need to make sure that you got enough capacity so that you can have ships coming in and out. And these tankers, they are really, really big. They're not just small fisher boats. These are huge tankers. And then thirdly, you need to be able to pay for all of that infrastructure. And that's the biggest challenge facing most of the countries in Europe. Right now is the switching away from the pipeline that's been in existence for around 15 years and replacing it with these newly built facilities on the coastline. Going to involve a lot more cost, and therefore it's going to raise the price of all of this natural gas. And of course, not every country in Europe either has enough space or spare coastline to use, or indeed any coastline at all. There are a number of countries in Europe that are landlocked, so they don't have the ability to be able to set up these floating LNG facilities. So their reliance upon other countries doing it for them and then importing the gas directly to them. So essentially what they're doing is exchanging the Russian imports for imports from other countries in some form of partnership agreements. So as a result of these physical and monetary challenges, you can see that it hasn't been easy for the countries of Europe to be able to stop buying Russian gas. This table shows that in the first 100 days after the invasion of Ukraine, a number of countries, including Germany, Italy, Poland, Bulgaria, and Austria, continued to buy large quantities of pipeline gas directly from Russia. And it's estimated in those first 100 days that NATO's nations collectively bought more than $54 million worth of Russian fossil fuels. But during these first 100 days, a lot of countries are working really hard on setting up those new LNG facilities to try to get away from buying all of this gas from Russia. Now, on the flip side of the equation, the problem that Russia faces is that it has historically grown very used to sending all of this gas that it's taking out of the ground into the pipelines and into Europe. And that's a very easy way of exporting this energy. It involves the lowest amount of costs from Russia's side, and it gives a maximum amount of profit. And as a result, Russia has not been developing its LNG facilities. So as I showed you in the table earlier, Russia has around 20% of all the natural gas reserves in the world. But because it's been exporting the majority of those reserves via pipelines, it hasn't been developing its LNG facilities in the same way as other countries that have large reserves. This table here shows the countries with the largest LNG export capacity in operation as of July 2022. And you can see that Australia currently has the largest capacity of around 88 million metric tons, followed by Qatar at 77 million and the United States at 74 million. Malaysia comes in at fourth on the list with around 31 million, and Algeria 29 million, and Russia, despite having the largest reserves of gas, are number 6 on this list and have a capacity of around 29 million metric tons per year. And this is now going to be a major problem for Russia, because Europe has stated that it no longer wants to buy any of the gas through the pipelines. By the way, we know that the pipelines have been bombed, so not really working. So Russia is going to see an enormous fall in its revenues from natural gas, and the only way that they're going to be able to replace these revenues is by liquefying that gas and exporting it overseas. And there are a number of issues facing Russia on that front. Firstly, it's going to have to construct new capacity to be able to convert the gas to LNG. And that is an expensive venture in itself. These plants cost billions of dollars to construct, and the need to build these new plants is coming at a time when Russia has lost most of its trading partners. So all of the oil and gas majors that it has been dealing with historically, such as Shell, BP, ExxonMobil, have all stated that they no longer want to invest in Russia. They've all exited from their facilities, so they don't have any partners to be able to pay for these facilities. But more importantly than that, they also don't have the technology because of the sanctions that are in place. So they're now facing a carte blanche ban on all of this new technology. And Russia needs cutting-edge technology because a lot of its gas fields are located in really difficult environments. So these are quite far north and have extreme temperatures. So it's challenging to be able to get that gas out, to liquefy it, and to be able to load it onto ships. And that's the other problem that Russia is facing as a result of the sanctions. A lot of the shipping companies, the insurance companies, the logistic companies are all from the West, and they have all applied sanctions and therefore no longer want to deal with Russia. So as well as being able to build the plants, which is a problem, they also need to find enough shipping capacity to be able to transport all of this LNG. So Russia is facing some major logistical problems as a result of having to switch away from normal gas supplies into LNG supplies. And because it hasn't been developing this side of its business historically, it's just not going to be able to replace those lost revenues anytime in the near future. But now let's talk about what's been happening to natural gas prices over the last few months. Now this chart shows the movement in European natural gas prices over the last 12 months. Now if we just pick out few key dates to have a look at what's been happening to those prices. Now this time, 12 months ago, the price of a megawatt hour of gas was around 75 euro. And although there was a brief increase in prices towards the end of 2021, the price was still sitting at around 75 prior to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. However, immediately after the invasion started, prices rose to around 230 per megawatt hour. And this price movement was due to the fact that the markets were concerned that Russia was going to switch off all supplies overnight. Now that obviously didn't happen. And then the spring and early summer prices stabilized to around $100. However, as the war continued and we started to see developments such as Russia switching off their supplies to Finland, Poland and Bulgaria, and then reducing the amounts of gas that they were sending through the Nord Stream pipelines to Germany, we started to see prices increasing dramatically, and towards the end of August, 1 megawatt hour of gas was trading for around 340 euro, which is an increase of around 450% compared to where prices were trading prior to the invasion. However, over the last couple of months, we have seen a market reduction in European gas prices and then now back to trading at around $100 per megawatt hour, which at face value seems surprisingly because during the last couple of months, we have seen the explosions take place at the Nord Stream gas pipelines, which means that it's now virtually impossible for Russia to be able to export the amounts of gas that it was previously exporting, even if the European countries wanted to buy it. So let's talk through the reasons why prices have been falling so quickly in Europe and, for that matter, across the world. There's two main reasons for that. Firstly, we've seen very mild temperatures over the last couple of months. The milder weather has meant that there has been a reduction in demand for both heating and electricity. And that means that there's been a reduction in the demand for gas, obviously. But in addition to the weather, we've also seen a reduction in the demand for gas as a result of a lot of European countries getting to the point where they've got their storage facilities almost 100% full. At the start of the war in Ukraine, the European Union issued the directive to all of its members stating that they had to get to 80% capacity on all of their storage to make sure that they had sufficient gas in reserves to get them through the winter period in the event that Russia would cut off all of the supplies. So over the last 6 months or so, we've seen all the countries of Europe buying as much gas as they can from Russia to put it into storage to give themselves some headroom. And we've now got to the point where that extra demand that's been in place for the previous 6 months is starting to tail off. This table shows the current position with regards to capacity. And as you can see, the European Union as a whole has filled around 94% of all of its gas storage capacity. I also briefly want to talk about consumer prices, because when we talk about gas prices, everybody thinks that we're talking about the amount that you're going to pay for your bill, but it doesn't actually translate like that directly. It's a little bit like when you go to the pump and you fill up your vehicle and you look at the prices and then you think, why are these prices not coming down? You see, there's a time delay, and the reason for that delay with regards to gas and electricity prices is because most of the companies who are dealing in the markets are hedging their position. So let's talk quickly about what hedging means. So if you are a European company that has to provide electricity or gas to your consumers, you do that on a contractual basis. So you'll have a contract in place with all of the consumers in your area, and you'll have a fixed rate agreed for a certain period of time. So that might be for the next 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months, depending on what sort of contract terms you've got. And at the moment, a lot of companies in Europe are having their prices capped by the governments. So they're being told that they're not allowed to charge above a certain amount per firm or per unit, because they don't want to put more pressure in terms of inflation into the economy. So in order to protect themselves from fluctuations in the market prices, they want to lock in a rate to make sure that they've got some form of guaranteed price stability and ultimately profit for the natural gas or electricity companies. Now, if the price of gas comes down in the international markets in the same way as I've just shown you on the graphs that it has done over the last couple of months, that won't affect that energy company because they've hedged their position. They've effectively bought forward for the next 3, 6, or 12 months at an agreed price. So movements in the market, day-to-day price, don't have any impact, and therefore the company, electricity company, cannot pass on those price savings in the global markets to the consumers because the deals are completely locked in place. So it's only over the longer term that we'll see the benefits of these movements in gas prices being fed through to consumers. And of course, if prices go back up, then obviously those gas price falls that we've seen over the last couple of months will never be passed on to consumers. Because if it comes to the point where the companies are looking to hedge for another 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months, prices have then bounced up again. And that means that they'll be at a higher price rate. So that's why in Europe right now, the most important factor is the price caps that are being set out by the government, because they know that prices have gone way through the roof. When you've got a 450% increase in gas prices, nobody can afford that. That would bankrupt a lot of people. They wouldn't be able to pay for their energy bills simply. And of course, it's a fundamental requirement for human existence being able to heat your home, to cook, and all of those things. So governments are looking after their consumers, and that's why they're applying caps, and the energy companies are being squeezed in the middle. And that's why we've seen issues such as Uniper in Germany having to be nationalized. They've been bailed out by the authorities because they were making massive losses. They were buying gas in the international markets, and they were being capped in terms of how much they could sell that for. So they ended up making massive losses on all of those purchases. Now that's not a sustainable position for a commercial entity. But if you are a government or governmental body, well, then you can absorb those losses. And it is likely that we will see gas prices staying at these high levels, even though they've come down over the last couple of months. They are, in fact, still very high compared to where they were over the last 5 years. Then we may see more of these companies being nationalized because it's simply impossible to make a profit at the cap rates that are being set out by the governments. And also the cap rates that are being set out by the governments are actually below the level where all of these energy companies would be charging if they were allowed to pass on all of the energy increases or the movements that have come through as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But specifically talking about today's video, we have seen a reduction over the last couple of months as a result of Europe not wanting to buy as much gas. Firstly, they've got the storage capacity up to acceptable levels, and secondly, we've had mild period, which has meant that there hasn't been much demand for gas. And all of that is good news for the European and global economies, because it means that Europe is not spending as much on energy, and therefore it may be able to deflect some of the impact of the forthcoming recession. Now, in terms of the impact on Russia, it's the flip side of what we are talking about. You see, Russia is dependent on energy export. It sells massive amount of gas and oil globally. That is the heart of the Russian economy. In 2021, Russia earned over 43 billion from selling gas and including oil. It earned over 150 billion in total. Now that represents around 30% of all the revenues that Russia was taking in. Now, as Russia sees its market declining, it's going to see a massive fall in those revenues, particularly for gas. As we discussed in some detail earlier in the video, it's not easy for Russia to be able to replace the lost sales of European gas with other sales, because it's been selling that gas through pipelines in a gaseous form. So in order to sell that gas to places like India and China, it needs either to build new pipelines, which will cost a huge amount of capital and will take long periods of time in order to complete, or it would need to convert that gas into LNG and then ship it. And as we also discussed earlier, that's going to be a major problem for Russia, because they simply haven't built enough LNG capacity over the last 10 years. They've gotten a bit lazy, they've got a bit complacent, thinking that they just keep selling this gas through their pipelines to Europe and that it would never end. But unfortunately for Russia, it is ending. It has ended for a number of countries already. We have seen also, furthermore, the Nord Stream pipelines being blown up, so they're no longer operational. And this is causing major problems for Russia, because they've just lost around 40 billion of revenue that they simply can't replace. Europe, furthermore, is managing to find a way to survive through this winter. It's got the capacity now filled up in the storage, and it's putting all of the replacement LNG facilities in place as quick as they can. So it looks like Europe will be okay for now, but it will have an impact on the European economy, because it's costing a lot more. You see, we are starting to see that feeding through. We are seeing a slowdown in a lot of different countries. And it's likely that we're going to see that a recession kicking in over the next few months. And from my point of view, we already are in a recession. But for Russia, the impact is more immediate, and it is much greater, because they've lost a huge source of revenue, and they've now got these facilities that are all in place and that they can't do anything with, because they can't divert those gas supplies to anybody else. So this is a really serious situation for Russia, and it comes at the same time as they've lost all of their trading partners for gas, and they've lost access to technology and knowledge. So this is going to be a major challenge for Russia going forward. So my final conclusion, it's not just a monetary issue of having to pay more for natural gas or LNG. There's also an actual capacity limit. And if we get to that point in Europe, well, then we could see blackouts. We could see companies and individuals not having enough electricity. And that would obviously further the impact on the economy, because we would see a reduction in output, and therefore GDP would fall, and therefore the recession would only be extended.